So I'm here to tell you, if you're not already aware, that 4-quadrant biopsies is not the gold standard. I mean, you've already seen this data here where it shows the increased yield that we've seen with Watts, whether we're talking non-dysplastic Barrett's, first-time diagnosis of Barrett's, high-grade dysplasia, or even early cancer. So when I saw all this data and everything, I thought to myself, being one of those surgeons, was, well, do I really need to even do biopsies then? I mean, this thing seems to be catching everything that I'm concerned about, right? I mean, the yield is incredibly higher with the Watts brush. Why am I having to still do the Seattle protocol, 4 biopsies pulled out of thin air every 1 to 2 centimeters? Can't I just do a Watts and be done? As I said at the beginning of this, that's going to actually save me time. I can do a Watts quicker than I do my Seattle protocol. Well, I brought this up probably 5 years ago, and I was shot down something fierce. You know, ooh, don't say that out loud. We don't have FDA approval for that. That's taboo. You're going to probably go to jail. There was all this fear put into me about wearing orange. Well, luckily for me, one of my ex-partners, Steve DeMeester, decided to look at this very question. Do we really need to do 4-quadrant biopsies when we're using Watts anyway? And so Steve, in a multi-center study, including GIs and surgeons, looked at that very question. Do we really need to do 4-quadrant biopsies? Will Watts pick up everything that we needed to know with those biopsies, or do we need to do both? And so that was really the purpose of the study. So again, it was a multi-center study looking at that very question. And so it was a big study. I mean, it was over 1,000 patients that they looked at. And 2 interesting things came out of this study. One was, first, was Watts picking up everything that the biopsies were in the patients that we knew that had Barrett's. So if you had a patient coming back for surveillance of their Barrett's, did we need to do both? And so that's sort of the top line here, the second bullet point here. The Forceps biopsies and the Watts came back pretty much identical in regards to their ability to detect Barrett's in a patient that we already knew had Barrett's. But to me, the most important thing out of this study was the fact that when they looked at patients that were coming in with reflux disease but weren't known to have Barrett's, and they saw a columnar segment that looked suspicious for it, did Watts do as good as Forceps biopsies? And what they saw here was that Watts actually did better in picking up new diagnosis of Barrett's esophagus. And so not only was it sufficient, in many ways it was better in that patient that we didn't know that had Barrett's. Its ability to detect dysplasia and everything, as Mike has already shown you, was similar in this. It was as good, if not better, in regards to the patients with dysplastic Barrett's. So again, first publication, the answer appears to be that you don't need to do both. And I think that's ultimately where we need to go with this technology. You know, I think a Watts is quicker and more than sufficient and probably picks up more of Barrett's and dysplasia.